Have you ever wondered what lies beneath the surface, in those unexplored depths where sunlight never reaches? This question haunted William Coughlin, an adventurous environmentalist, whose curiosity led him to the most harrowing experience of his life. What started as an exciting exploration of a mysterious cave ended in a catastrophic ordeal, a deadly reminder that there is only but a thin line between thrill and danger. William Coughlin, a 25-year-old environmentalist from Oak Forest, Illinois, had an insatiable love for the beautiful outdoors. His mother, Marge, talked a lot about his love for wild animals and his dedication to preserving nature. Working for the Federal Environmental Protection Agency, William's job mirrored his passion for protecting the environment. He spent his free time exploring woods and waterways with his friends, and he was always seeking new adventures. Recently, he picked up quite an unusual interest in caving, which was introduced to him by a friend. After a successful exploration of a small cave near his home, William's confidence soared, pushing him and his friends to tackle even more challenging caves, despite their lack of experience and proper equipment. The thing was that these men were encouraged by their initial success. Maybe if they had faced a very difficult challenge, they'd have packed their things and sworn to whatever god they served that they would never again return to caving. But because it was successful, William and his friends, James and Kevin, set their sights on a more formidable challenge. They decided to visit Cave City in Kentucky, a unique tourist destination renowned for its labyrinth of underground caves. Among the many caves, Buzzard's Roost stood out for its promise of adventure, with deep drops and tight squeezes warning of the dangers within. The trio's excitement overshadowed the risks, and they eagerly planned their first organized caving trip. On Friday, May 28, 1993, these three men traveled from Illinois to Cave City, arriving on Memorial Day weekend. While the surface attractions teemed with visitors, they focused solely on the miles of caves beneath them. In Cave City, they discovered two available tours: the Historic Tour and the Wild Cave Tour. The Historic Tour offered a guided walkthrough of accessible parts of the cave, but the Wild Cave Tour promised a more daring experience, requiring crawling, twisting, and squeezing through undeveloped passages. Choosing to start with the Historic Tour, they signed a release form warning of the cave's dangers and absolving the operators of liability. Trusting the guide and the operators to keep them safe, they embarked on the tour. William and James were eager to continue exploring, even after learning about the risks. However, Kevin chose to stay above ground, preferring the local attractions. After completing the Historic Tour with guide Dave Harden, William and James decided to take on the more challenging Wild Cave Tour that afternoon. Along with 4 other participants, they paid the guide for this scary adventure. Before the tour began, they signed another release form, identical to the first, and received 2 handheld flashlights. The guide instructed them to follow him closely, emphasizing the importance of staying together and warning of the tour's dangers. He showed them the tight tunnels they would crawl through, making it clear that this tour was far more perilous than the Historic Tour. Undeterred by the warnings, William and James pressed on, their excitement undiminished. Despite the lack of additional equipment, helmets, extra food, water, and multiple light sources, they felt ready for the challenge. The group navigated the twists and turns of the passages, and adrenaline was coursing speedily through their veins. Reaching the halfway point without incident, they found the cave less complicated than expected, fueling their desire for more adventure. Encouraged by the guide, the group descended into the lower parts of the cave. After crawling through a narrow passage, they reached a 30-foot hanging cable ladder with wooden rungs. The guide called out instructions as they descended, but the second ladder, shorter at 15 to 20 feet, posed more of a challenge due to its placement over a rocky outcrop. After the group descended the second ladder, the guide announced the official tour had ended and they were free to explore nearby passages. However, he mentioned they were behind schedule and left them at the bottom of the ladder to make a quick phone call. Intrigued by a passage he had seen earlier, William decided to climb back up the second ladder to explore. James agreed, thinking they might find an unexplored part of the cave. William, tired and frustrated, found the ladder unsteady. Standing a whopping 6 feet tall and weighing around 220 pounds, he struggled to get hold of it. He decided to take a break and wait for the guide. James suggested the other group members look for the guide because he had been gone for quite a while. William decided to attempt the ladder again, but as he climbed higher, he became so nervous, and that's when tragedy struck. Halfway up, he lost his grip and fell. The fall was badly brutal. He hit his head on a protruding rock before landing hard on the cave floor. Blood started to pour out like water from a 2-inch cut on his scalp. James's eyes shot wide open, and in shock, He rushed to help him. William might have been conscious, but he was delirious and couldn't make sense of his surroundings, which made the group panic even more. James tried to calm him down, reassuring him that they would get him out safely. He spoke softly, telling William to hold on and stay with him. The situation was dire, and every second felt like an eternity as they waited for help. When the guide finally returned, he insisted they had to climb the ladders and exit the way they had entered. But William, badly injured and delirious, couldn't possibly climb. The group feared for his life, knowing that every moment spent in the cave reduced his chances of survival. This made James furious. He argued with the guide, demanding a cave rescue team to get William out. The guide stood firm, telling James the group had to work together to rescue William. James suspected the guide wanted to avoid causing panic among the many visitors above ground. Reluctantly, the group agreed their only option was to avoid the ladder and lead William through a narrow corridor marked on the brochures provided by the guide. This passage wasn't part of the planned adventure, but had been mapped and explored previously. They pushed and pulled and, to their surprise, managed to overcome this first major hurdle. The real challenge lay ahead, navigating a narrow, claustrophobia-inducing V-shaped passage. The passage was rough and sharp, making it hard to get a good grip. It required a belly crawl, undulating up and down before taking a decisive turn to the left and downward. William entered the tight passage head first, his large frame barely fitting through. William supposedly had the biggest frame among everyone in the group, and he was nervous about getting stuck. He had barely squeezed through initially. Halfway through, he realized he couldn't move any further. Gravity worked against him, and soon he was yelling for help, stuck horizontally with his arm pinned under his body. The others tried pulling him, but the more they tried, the more stuck he became. James couldn't believe the nightmare unfolding before his eyes again. Desperately, he used all his strength to push William out, but this only wedged him further. William's position compressed his diaphragm and lungs, making each breath a physical chore. His breathing grew extremely labored, and he began making gurgling sounds. The guide told James to go to the surface to get the cave owner and explain the situation. James did, but he quickly realized that the tour guide and the cave owner wanted to handle the situation without notifying the authorities. Realizing William would need significant mechanical assistance to be rescued, the guide finally left to grab a medical kit and alert the authorities. 3 crucial hours passed before medical and rescue personnel arrived. As they waited, onlookers began to murmur and talk of the 1925 death of Floyd Collins, who had been trapped in a nearby cave, and before you knew it, this began to draw huge crowds and media attention. James tried to comfort William, but deep down, he feared his friend might not survive being trapped in that crevice. William's responses became slower until he stopped answering altogether, leaving James dreading the worst. When the rescue teams finally arrived, they worked tirelessly, determined to save William. However, his downward angle made the rescue even more challenging. They used chemical heat blankets and heaters to protect him from hypothermia as the cave's temperature dropped to around 44 degrees Fahrenheit. William's body filled the crevice, making it impossible to access him above his shoulder. The rescuers helped the rest of the group leave the cave, but James refused to leave his friend's side. The rescue crew set up a pulley system to extract William, but each tug caused him immense pain. He started to moan and groan, but the team persisted. They spent all of Saturday trying to free him until, tragically, he succumbed and was pronounced dead. 17 hours after the rescuers arrived, it took another 7 hours to remove William's body. Using ladders and ropes, they brought him out at 2:30 p.m. on Monday, nearly 3 days after he first entered the cave. Mike Swift, the Barron County coroner, confirmed that William died from compressive and positional asphyxia, with a head contusion contributing to his death. The 10th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals later found that the cave attraction owner had been aware of the risks but failed to adequately warn the participants. Consequently, William's family was awarded damages for the tragedy, recognizing that the waivers he signed were more of an incitement than a warning of specific dangers. This devastating story serves as a reminder of the dangers that lie beneath the surface. Yes, William Coughlin's tragic story serves as a cautionary tale for all adventurers that no matter how thrilling the prospect of exploring the unknown may be, proper preparation and respect for the risks involved are paramount. Would you dare to venture into the depths of an unexplored cave, knowing the potential for danger? For William Coughlin, the beauty in exploring the unknown was irresistible, but it came at an unbearable cost. His story is a sad reminder that while curiosity can lead to incredible discoveries, it can also lead to unforeseen perils. In the aftermath of William's death, the incident sparked a debate about the safety protocols and responsibilities of tour operators. Critics argued that the cave attraction owner had failed to provide adequate warnings and equipment, placing profit over participant safety. The case highlighted the importance of stringent safety measures measures and thorough preparation for all adventure activities, emphasizing that excitement should never come at the expense of safety. William Coughlin's tragic story has left a lasting impact on the caving community and beyond. It serves as a powerful lesson for both seasoned explorers and novices. Always prioritize safety, understand the risks, and never underestimate the environment's potential hazards. His legacy continues to remind us that while the call of the unknown is strong, it must be approached with caution, respect, and preparedness. So, next time you're tempted to explore an uncharted path, ask yourself, is the thrill worth the risk? There was a brutal incident at Halona blowhole on June 30th, 2002, involving 18-year-old Daniel Dick, who was vacationing in Hawaii with his mother and two younger brothers. Daniel had just graduated as the student body president from his high school in Los Angeles and was preparing to attend California State University in the fall. He was an upstanding young man whose future, as people would say, was brighter than the sun, and even before this trip, he had been working part-time at a grocery store. That morning, Daniel headed down to the beach, intending to swim and soak up some sun. Soon, he met three girls, and, after about 30 minutes of chatting, the ridiculous idea came to him, and he foolishly suggested they climb over the fence to check out the blowhole. A blowhole is a narrow hole on the rocks near the crashing waves, formed by molten lava, one that connects to a tunnel that leads to the water, causing waves to shoot up through the hole in a spectacular geyser. Now, I don't know if they didn't teach this in science class, but while the blowhole could look extremely fascinating from a distance, there are few things as dangerous as it when up close. The beach Daniel and the girls were on was near the notoriously dangerous Halona blowhole. The tunnel connected to some of the most turbulent waters in Hawaii, causing waves to rocket 30+ feet into the air. To ensure safety, a fence and warning signs were placed around the blowhole, emphasizing the need to keep a distance due to the powerful water surging through the tunnel. Standing safely behind the fence, you could feel the ground tremble as the waves rumbled through the tunnel and exploded out of the blowhole. Daniel's family and friends described him as adventurous rather than reckless, always eager to experience new things. But this decision to want to see the blowhole was suicidal. Yes, the blowhole intrigued him, and he couldn't resist the urge to get up close and personal with it. Despite warnings from the girls, Daniel insisted on feeling the power of the water hitting him in the chest. Determined, Daniel headed towards the rocks, passing a couple enjoying their time on the beach. He waved at them, climbed up the rocks, and scaled the fence, timing it perfectly. He waited for a geyser to shoot up and subside before positioning himself over the edge of the hole, hovering his chest just above where the water would surge. The first wave shot up, hitting Daniel in the chest and staggering him. The girls and the couple yelled at him to move away, but Daniel was resolute in this idiocracy. He moved again, leaning back over the blowhole just as a massive wave barreled through the tunnel. The water erupted, lifting him 5 feet into the air and flipping him upside down. I cannot begin to imagine the fear on the faces of the girls and the couple. And then it happened. Daniel fell headfirst into the blowhole, his body forming a perfect dive. The narrow opening of the blowhole extended down 8 feet before widening into a cavernous space, like the inside of a teapot, filled with violent, churning water. This section connected to an underground tunnel leading out to the sea, and this was the deal breaker. Once inside, there was no way back up. The narrow opening provided no grip, and the force required to push oneself out was insurmountable. The only possible escape was through the underwater tunnel, constantly pounded by waves. Swimming through this tunnel was nearly impossible, as the waves would push back or trap anyone attempting the journey. Daniel's fate was sealed, as he was forced into the cavern, with zero to no chance of resurfacing. As soon as Daniel vanished into the blowhole, the couple and the 3 girls scrambled up the rocks, jumped over the fence, and peered into the tunnel, desperately calling his name. They shouted for others on the beach to call 911. Each time a wave surged through the tunnel, they felt the ground shake and knew that if Daniel were still alive, he was being submerged for around 30 seconds with each wave. By the time the police arrived, Daniel had been trapped in the blowhole for some time, with no signs of life or sound from him. The situation looked increasingly bleak. The authorities declared it nearly impossible for anyone to survive inside the blowhole, especially at high tide, which was when Daniel had fallen in. The police explained they couldn't send divers until low tide because the conditions inside the blowhole were too dangerous. The best they could do was drop a weighted line into the blowhole, anchored on the outside, in the hope that if Daniel was somehow still alive, he could grab the line and hold on until rescuers could reach him. However, pulling himself through the narrow opening to safety was unlikely. The next day, during low tide, divers went into the water and found Daniel Daniel's body floating near the entrance where the water gets sucked into the tunnel and out through the blowhole. It seemed he had been pulled back out through the tunnel to the sea. It remained unclear how long Daniel had survived after falling into the blowhole, or if he had attempted to swim through the tunnel, but ultimately he drowned. In the aftermath, Daniel's mother petitioned for a metal grate to be placed over the blowhole to prevent future accidents. However, this proposal faced opposition from locals who argued that the issue was not the blowhole itself, but rather people failing to respect the power of nature. While the fence around Halona blowhole remains, warning people to keep their distance, the entrance to the blowhole itself is still uncovered. This incident serves as a grim reminder of the dangers that lurk in nature's most fascinating features, and also a warning that there is only but a thin line between adventurousness and recklessness. In this case, it was nothing more than youthful recklessness. The next incident is even more gruesome and sad. Despite numerous warnings, Darren Spivey took his 15-year-old son, Dylan, to one of the most dangerous caves ever known to man. Sadly, the frigid depths would ultimately claim their lives in a desperate struggle for air. In 2014, Darren Spivey, a 35-year-old avid scuba diver, wanted to share his love for diving with his son, so on Christmas Eve, Darren gave Dylan scuba tanks as an early present. They were both eager to use them, discussing and intensely planning a dive for the next morning. On Christmas morning, the father and son woke up after struggling to sleep due to the excitement, and they headed straight to a local dive site, only to find the gate locked. Determined, Darren decided to take them to another dive site in Central Florida, within a wildlife management area, open 24/7 to hunters, hikers, and divers. The pair drove to the park entrance, and were beyond happy to find out that it was indeed open. They exited the car, put on their wetsuits and scuba gear, and waddled over to a wooden walkway that extended from the parking lot out onto a pond like a dock. As they walked, they passed numerous signs warning against diving in this pond unless they were expert divers. Just imagine. This was the second sign from God telling them that today was definitely not the day for diving. First, the dive area they wanted to enter was locked, and now this one had a serious warning. This seemingly tranquil pond was the entrance to the infamous and deadly Eagle's Nest, known in the cave diving community as the Mount Everest of cave diving. At the bottom of the placid pond lay a narrow hole, the entrance to a tunnel that descended straight down. This was the only way in or out of a massive underwater cave system. Expert divers would grab the guideline leading into the cave and follow it down until the light above faded, leaving only black nothingness below. At the end of the tunnel, the space opened into a massive chasm called the ballroom. In the ballroom, even the most powerful flashlight couldn't reveal the walls, making it feel like being in outer space. The guideline continued straight down to the bottom of the ballroom, around 130 feet deep, where a sign with a grim reaper warned, "Stop, prevent your own death. Do not go any further. There's nothing in this cave worth dying for." This sign marked the last easy chance to turn around and return to the surface. Beyond the sign, the cave branched into two directions, with the tunnels becoming narrower and more evil, pardon my choice of words, descending to depths of 300 feet. Even for experienced divers, this area was extremely dangerous. A current flowed through Eagle's Nest, and losing the guideline could result in being swept away and lost in the pitch-black cave, making it nearly impossible to find the way out. Many divers had died attempting these dives, as small mistakes at such depths could be fatal. The warning sign aimed to prevent further tragedies. Yet, as Darren and Dylan stood at the end of the walkway, ready to jump into the pond, they were unfazed by the warnings. Neither of them were expert divers. In fact, Dylan wasn't even certified. Before they jumped into the water, Darren texted his fiancée, saying they were at Eagle's Nest and about to dive, promising to call when they resurfaced. Then, he put his phone away, and they both plunged into the water, swimming towards the entrance of Eagle's Nest. Hours passed with no call from Darren. As the sun began to set, Darren's fiancée, growing worried, decided to check on them. She drove to the parking lot at Eagle's Nest. She spotted Darren's car, but saw no sign of the boys. Alarmed, she called the police. Soon, professional divers arrived at Eagle's Nest to search for Darren and Dylan. The divers entered the water, swam to the narrow entrance, and descended the tunnel into the ballroom. Holding the guideline, they scanned the ceiling with their flashlights, knowing that bodies were often found near the entrance in cave diving accidents. Their lights fell on Dylan's lifeless body, trapped against the ceiling just 6 feet from the entrance. His emergency flotation devices had inflated, his mouthpiece was out, and his tanks were empty. The divers retrieved Dylan's body and returned to Eagle's Nest, following the guideline down to the bottom of the ballroom. There, they found Darren lying on a sandy hill, his mouthpiece out, his tanks also empty. He was next to the infamous sign with the Grim Reaper that read, "Stop, prevent your own death, don't go any farther." Both Darren's and Dylan's gauges indicated they had descended to 230 feet. To put this in perspective, recreational diving ranges from 0 to 130 feet, where divers can use regular air and require minimal training. Below 130 feet, divers need special gas mixes, advanced equipment, and extensive training, all of which Darren and Dylan lacked. An investigation into their deaths concluded it was a tragic accident. The prevailing theory is that Darren and Dylan entered the ballroom, descended to the bottom, and ventured into one of the two tunnels branching off. They reached a depth of 230 feet, where they likely experienced nitrogen narcosis, a state akin to drunkenness. In their impaired condition, they probably lost track of time and their air supply. When they returned to the ballroom to ascend, they had run out of air. Dylan likely ran out first, showed his father his empty gauge, and Darren, seeing this, gave his son his regulator to share air. As they ascended together, Darren's tanks also emptied. He lost consciousness and sank to the bottom. Dylan, managing to get a full breath, tried desperately to swim to the surface. He inflated his emergency flotation devices to rise faster, but in his panic, lost hold of the guideline. He swam up, hit the ceiling, and unable to find the exit, drowned. Despite all the warnings, both outside and within the cave, cautioning inexperienced divers to stay away, Eagle's Nest continues to lure divers. To date, 11 people have perished in its depths. Something very disastrous happened deep inside hidden caves in the heart of France. John Manell's quest for exploration took a dangerous turn. Alone in the depths, battling darkness and lack of oxygen, he faced a fateful decision that would seal his tragic fate. Born in 1976, John Manell's life revolved around his passions for motorcycling and scuba diving. He began training locally before joining Brighton's British Sub-Aqua Club, BSAC, where he advanced to using a rebreather, a device that recycles exhaled air for longer. However, it requires careful management to avoid life-threatening risks like oxygen toxicity or hypoxia. John Valanthan, a pioneer in cave exploration and rescue, set world records and played a pivotal role in the 2018 Thai cave rescue. His incredible explorations expanded the limits of cave diving. On November 18, 2007, he made history by diving into the depths of Daos, laying down 476 feet, 145 meters, of guide rope. A year later, Andre Glory and Pedro Bardi further explored the cave, extending the marked line to an impressive 1,549 feet. Their efforts inspired subsequent dives that pushed the cave's known boundaries to an astonishing 3,445 feet. Inspired by these achievements, John Manell joined the quest to explore the source of Daos, with support from his friends Charles Reed, Henry, and John Banan. The narrow passages posed risks of damaging equipment, making retreat difficult in emergencies. Despite warnings about the size of his rebreather and the dangers it posed in the cave's restrictive sections, Manell chose to proceed. Adding to the risks, Manell faced physical limitations from a severe back injury sustained in a motorcycle accident in 1998. This injury not only marked him physically, but also posed ongoing challenges during the expedition. Although it had been overlooked, this critical aspect of his health condition became a serious factor in the events that unfolded. As the three friends delved deeper into the cave system, the combination of the challenging environment, bulky equipment, and Manell's physical limitations created a scenario that will make anyone run to the hills, or in this case, run out of the caves. The secluded origin of Dao is a hidden water-filled cave at the base of Morteau, near Montbéliard, known as France's coldest town. It faces extremely low temperatures in winter and hot summers, earning it the nickname Little Siberia. The cave, nestled in this rugged landscape near Lodz, is a place of quiet isolation. Thick forests in the Jura region add to its seclusion. The cave's clear waters intrigue divers, but its chilly depths, around 43 degrees Fahrenheit, 6 degrees Celsius, are scary and echo the solitude of its surroundings. On September 28, 2008, the expedition began to explore the source of Daos. Each member ventured into the cave's depths independently, facing the unknown without team support. And this made me question, why assemble a team if you're not going to work as a team? Entering the cave was the first challenge for Manell. Carrying his bulky rebreather, he cautiously navigated the tight space. About 13 meters in, he reached the upper ledge of S2, a deep shaft resembling an abyss. The water turned freezing cold and completely dark, leaving him to rely solely on his flashlights to be able to see. Descending vertically through S2 tested his skills and courage. The cold water and oppressive darkness made him feel trapped, with the cave walls ominously close. The cave's depths required constant alertness due to its delicate layout. The underwater passage was like a maze, with each turn potentially hiding dangers like sudden drops or narrow passages that could trap him. The cave was so silent that the only sounds were his breathing and the bubbles from his rebreather. Moving forward, the cave felt increasingly constricting. The passage narrowed, and the floor became hazardous with sharp rocks and hidden boulders. The cold water sapped his strength, and the narrow passages demanded precision in the darkness, challenging his senses. Every meter he descended took him further from the safety of the surface and deeper into the heart of the cave. As he progressed, the cave features became more daunting. Stalactites and stalagmites formed scary shapes in the beam of his flashlight. The water's chill penetrated his wetsuit, reminding him of the cave's indifference to human presence. At 1,562 feet, 322 meters, the shaft's descent became steeper, leading him to an ominous, more jagged obstruction. Its mouth was cluttered with chunky, blocky materials. To the right of the shaft floor, a narrow crevice beckoned, leading to an uphill cave passage. Significant sediment accumulation resulted in intense turbidity, clouding Manell's vision and making it more difficult for the man to navigate. The water, thick with particulate matter, created a disorienting, murky veil. But despite the extreme conditions, John's determination remained resolute. As he navigated deeper into the cave, he encountered a narrow passage to the left, a gateway to a more dangerous valley-side corridor. This passage, slightly expanded in 2002, still presented a formidable challenge. But John was an expert. He maneuvered through the tight confines, every movement calculated and deliberate. The claustrophobic space demanded exceptional control, as any misstep could result in entanglement or equipment failure. Carefully monitoring his depth gauge and air supply, John progressed through the passage and descended into the shaft floor of S3. What was once an open hall had collapsed, burying the initial 98 feet, 30 meters, under a maze of debris and tight squeezes. After traversing approximately 1,821 feet, John reached the first major fold zone. This place had steep slopes and very unpredictable terrain. The passage angled sharply downward, lined with gravel banks, remnants of ancient underwater currents. These natural barriers forced him to navigate even more carefully, as loose gravel and the steep incline posed significant risks. As John ventured deeper, the cave's narrow walls seemed to close in, intensifying his sense of claustrophobia. The depth he reached highlighted the dangers of diving alone. His air supply was running low, emphasizing the importance of the rule of thirds in cave diving. This safety protocol ensures careful air management, leaving enough for a safe return. Ready to exit, John felt a sense of accomplishment, but knew he had to leave with his dwindling air supply. Retracing his path, he faced the same challenges from his descent. Each twist and turn demanded his full attention and skill. The journey back became a race against time and his depleting air reserves. Navigating through the cave's tight passages with a heavy rebreather was a formidable task. Precariously positioned boulders could easily dislodge, turning his route into a mousetrap. Despite this, John still pressed forward. At the end of the S2 section, he encountered a series of tight squeezes, strewn with large boulders. The tight confines seemed to constrict around him, leaving little room to maneuver. To ease his struggle, John made a critical decision that would soon prove dire. He chose to remove his rebreather. This decision was risky, but at this point, it seemed like the only way out. Relying on an alternate air source, a bottle held under his arm, he continued through the narrow gap. Suddenly, the cave's oppressive walls began pressing in on him, making movement difficult. His back injury from 1998 further complicated the situation, preventing him from reattaching the rebreather in such tight quarters. With limited options and a deteriorating situation, John decided to move faster toward the surface. Navigating this deadly path with just the air bottle under his arm, the ascent took a wrong turn when the bottle suddenly detached from his mouthpiece, leaving him stranded without an air supply. Panic set in as John frantically searched for the lost air bottle, but the murky water, tight space, and hampered movements turned the cave into a disorienting maze. As precious seconds ticked away, the lack of oxygen began to destroy John's chances of survival. John's breaths grew shallow, his became very slow, and his vision blurred. In those harrowing moments, the surrounding darkness, the weight of the water above, and the realization of his predicament created an overwhelming sense of dread. Overcome by hypoxia, John's mind began to fade. Alone and trapped deep within the cave's cold, unyielding walls, he faced the brutal reality of his situation. Brent Colvin and his team of 6 cavers, led by Luca Carabini, set off on an epic expedition to Thunder Canyon Cave in eastern San Diego County. Finding the cave was no easy task, as they needed to have insider knowledge to pinpoint its location. It involved navigating a dirt road, and after hiking 2 miles, they arrived. Recent rains had turned the cave's usual trickle into a full-blown torrent. Thunder Canyon Cave is known for its claustrophobic, pitch-black passages, slippery terrain, and sudden drop-offs. Because of this, ropes and heavy chains are needed to navigate inside the cave's labyrinthine structure, created by random boulders. At this time, Brent Colvin was a 39-year-old software engineer from Valley Center, California. He always carefully and excitedly planned his cave excursions. His wife, Raina, supported all his adventures, including this one. Brent, a 215-pound advanced caver, had been exploring caves like Thunder Canyon Cave for about a year. He was very excited on Sunday, May 3rd, 2010, when he joined his fellow cavers for another adventure. They arrived at the cave site at 11 o'clock a.m., geared up, and put on their wetsuits. Their first challenge was a 45-foot rappel through a waterfall into a cold pool. This thrilling descent was something Brent had been eagerly anticipating for weeks. Next, they descended a rock face, using a double rope anchored to a boulder near the cave's entrance. The plan was to go downstream and then take a break to decide which part of the cave to explore next. The descent down the rope was a rush for Brent, something he had been looking forward to all month. Once they were down, most of the group felt relieved, but some were still nervous. Luca, their guide, was glad everyone made it safely past the first big challenge. Steve, who went down second, got soaked and started shaking, realizing how tough the trip would be. At this point, Luca had to ask if anyone wanted to turn back, and they all refused. Forward ever, backward never. After deciding to proceed to the middle entrance, the group spent about 10 to 15 minutes setting up the next 80-foot rappel. They continued their descent into the cave, navigating through crawling, climbing, and wading through icy water. Fortunately, despite the challenges, the group successfully completed 2 more rappels without any incidents. Around 3 o'clock p.m., they reached a notorious section of the cave known as the Terrible Traverse. This crack, with a name as weird as a supervillain base, is very difficult, bends at a right angle, and is only 9 inches wide, forcing cavers to move sideways without turning their heads. To prevent slipping and getting stuck, someone had placed a wooden board across the gap. The crack extends vertically for 200 feet, about 60 meters, and is just 5 minutes away from the cave's downstream end. Successfully navigating this passage meant reaching the exit, which was the group's goal for the day. Despite being tired, wet, and achy from hours of navigating boulders and squeezing through narrow gaps, Brent felt a surge of excitement. He had never ventured this far into the cave before, making this a personal milestone and a rare accomplishment in the world of caving. Brent aimed to demonstrate his advanced caving skills to himself and his fellow cavers. After packing up their harnesses, Luca went through the narrow crack first to assist from the other side. Steve, feeling cold and exhausted, attempted to follow but got stuck. Already in poor shape, he began to panic. As the least experienced member of the group, nothing could have been scarier than this for him. After 10 long minutes of pushing and pulling, they managed to free him. Traumatized and exhausted, Steve realized he was way out of his depth and decided to leave the cave immediately. While Steve was recovering, 3 more cavers successfully navigated the crack. Luca then escorted these 3 to the cave's exit, confident that Brent and Jim, both expert cavers, could manage on their own. Brent was second to last to attempt the challenging passage that had trapped Steve. Though his heart raced with anxiety, Brent decided to give it a shot. The trick was to move feet first through the crack, angle sideways to shimmy along, and then drop 5 feet into the next chamber. On his first attempt, Brent sensed he wouldn't make it. Despite Jim's encouragement, he didn't want to inconvenience anyone by having to retrace their steps through the cave. If he had known, he would have followed his instincts. He decided to remove his wetsuit, opting to try again in just his t-shirt. Sliding through the crack, his hips jammed, his feet poked through to the other side, and his left arm was the only thing supporting him, resting on a wooden plank placed to prevent cavers from slipping deep into the crevice. Feeling the tension of the rock pressing against him, Brent's chest was squeezed tight, and his body was contorted. Despite his efforts to wiggle free, he found himself completely stuck, unable to move in any direction. His face pressed against the cold rock, Brent suddenly felt sweat pouring down his face, realizing that maybe, just maybe, he had gotten into a lot of trouble. Brent felt on the verge of tears, realizing he was in one of the worst possible predicaments that could befall anyone in the cave. Luca eventually returned, and hearing Brent's moans, sprang into action, knowing he had to do everything in his power to save him. He and Jim tried everything they could, but Brent was severely stuck. After about 2 hours, Brent began to lose feeling in his arms and slipped further into the crack, where the gap narrowed to just 8.5 inches. His body weight now rested on his left elbow, with his back and chest pressed against the cold granite walls. Jim, positioned behind Brent, tried unsuccessfully to yank him free. The effort was excruciatingly painful for Brent, and, do you know what's worse? It wasn't working. Unfortunately, Jim couldn't get out either unless Brent was freed. The group shielded Brent with jackets and anything they could find, encouraging him to keep moving any part of his body, even if just slightly. Brent began kicking out his right leg, and apart from Jim's headlamp, they were in total darkness. Jim kept Brent awake by telling stories, while Luca, Steve, and Ben did everything they could to maintain his body temperature. Luca eventually made it back to the exit to involve the rescue team. 4 rescuers entered the cave, and after talking with Brent, discovered he had been trapped for almost 6 hours and was severely hypothermic. They strapped him into a harness, but he was too weak to climb out. They brought in a sledgehammer and began breaking up the rocks wedged between Brent's back and the granite walls. Inch by inch, the rescue team took turns with the hammer, while Jim held Brent's hand and kept talking to him. At around 6:02 a.m., after almost 9 deadly hours of being trapped, Brent's harness finally loosened, and he was pulled out of the crack. The group dragged him to the cave's exit, ensuring he remained conscious. The rescue team was relieved but exhausted. They took turns carrying Brent up the steep rock face, and this was no small challenge. Once outside, Brent was rushed to the hospital for severe hypothermia and dehydration. He was stable and expected to recover fully. The entire ordeal was very terrifying, and Brent didn't need a fortune teller to tell him to take a break from caving to recover and reflect on what had happened. His near-death experience made him value life more and appreciate his wife, Reina, who had anxiously awaited his safe return. Luca Carabini, the group's leader, took the experience seriously as well, organizing more extensive safety training for cavers to prevent such incidents in the future. 6 men suffered in a very horrible diving accident in what actually started as a routine saturation dive. This happened at the Byford oil rig, and sadly, it resulted in the demise of 4 saturation divers and 1 crew member, with only 1 person barely making it out alive. So let's get right into this wicked accident that their human brains could not even comprehend. Only we, the living, could see the outcome. On Saturday, November 5, 1983, while drilling in the Frigg gas field in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, divers Edwin Coward, Roy P. Lucas, Bjørn Giæver Bergersen, and Truls Hellevik were assigned maintenance work deep beneath the rig. Assisting them were 2 dive tenders, Martin Saunders and William Crammond. Bjørn Bergersen and Truls Hellevik went down to a depth of 295 feet to perform maintenance on the bottom frame of the drilling structure. With the help of a diving bell, divers could reach great depths and stay in connected chambers where they lived temporarily. And unlike other divers, they spent up to 28 days in small, high-pressure chambers, working, eating, and sleeping. On the Byford Dolphin, the oil company had them working 18-hour shifts with only about 3 hours of sleep before making them start again. The pay was very good, often between $30,000 to $45,000 a month, but the work environment was cramped and tough. The rig needed hundreds of crew members working hard at the same time, but no one knew what was about to happen. No one suspected that the 4 divers' routine tasks would soon turn into a disaster. As they entered their pressurized living chambers, the setup included Chamber 1, Chamber 2, an escape capsule on top of a lifeboat, and a trunk connected to the diving bell. The bell would attach to this trunk as the diving tenders, William Crammond and Martin Saunders, operated it from the outside on the rig. The pressurized chambers stayed on the rig, while the diving bell could detach to go down to the needed depth. This system allowed efficient use of time and resources, making the transition between the underwater environment and the pressurized living quarters smooth. Many of us have never dived before, excluding water parks and burying our heads in our bathtubs, so we may not know that pressure is a diver's worst enemy. In fact, ambient pressure increases by approximately 1 atmosphere for every 33 feet of water depth, adding a force equivalent to 14.6 pounds per square inch on the body with each additional atmosphere. Saturation divers face significant challenges due to these conditions. The fact remains that the primary issue with diving is not descending to high pressures, but safely returning to the surface. As divers go deeper, the rising water pressure causes nitrogen and helium to dissolve into their bloodstream, saturating it relative to the pressure increase. This occurs as divers breathe a special gas mixture, usually helium and oxygen, otherwise called heliox, which is adjusted based on the dive depth. This process is known as saturation diving. So if divers ascend too quickly, the rapid decrease in pressure can lead to decompression sickness, or what we call the bends. This condition causes the dissolved nitrogen to revert to gas form, creating bubbles in the body. The bends can result in nausea, dizziness, severe joint pain, paralysis, and even death. To prevent decompression sickness, divers must ascend slowly, giving their bodies enough time to naturally expel the excess nitrogen. On this fateful day, everything was supposed to go as normal, as the life support technicians had already made sure that, in the hyperbaric chambers, the air composition was tailored to match what the divers needed to breathe underwater. Meanwhile, the dive control team operated the diving bell, using a crane to raise and lower it while monitoring the divers' activities. At 4 o'clock in the morning, Truls Hellevik and Björn Bergersen finished their maintenance work at a depth of 295 feet, which required a pressure of 9 atmospheres, and ascended back to the surface in the diving bell. Upon reaching the surface, the diving bell needed to be reattached to the diving chambers, both maintaining the same atmospheric pressure. On the surface, Edwin Coward and Roy Lucas were resting, ready to take over the next shift when Truls and Björn returned. There is a crucial role in saturation diving belongs to the tenders, who assist with deploying and retrieving the umbilical. The umbilical is a lifeline for the divers, connecting their air supply and communication with the surface. In the past, tenders were also responsible for docking the diving bell to the pressurized living chambers, as was the case on the Byford Dolphin. The tenders, including William Crammond and Martin Saunders, were critical to the divers' safety. Despite already working for over 12 hours, the experienced tenders were prepared to reconnect the diving bell to the hyperbaric living chambers as Truls Hellevik and Björn Bergersen returned. Crammond successfully connected the diving bell to the living chambers and safely transferred Björn Bergersen and Truls Hellevik into Chamber 1. Now, these guys were experts, and this wasn't their first, second, fifth, or even 15th dive. This was a process they knew by heart. Under normal circumstances, transferring divers to the rest area and removing the diving bell was a straightforward process. The procedure typically followed these steps. Step 1. Close the diving bell door, which was open to the trunk. 2. Slightly increase the pressure in the diving bell to seal the door tightly. 3. Close the Chamber 1 door, which was also open to the trunk. Step 4. Gradually depressurize the trunk to 1 atmosphere. And the 5th and final step. Open the clamp to separate the diving bell from the chamber system. However, an unexpected disaster occurred. Crammond opened the clamp, triggering a chain reaction that caused a violent decompression of the chambers. The diving bell disconnected before the chamber doors were fully closed, resulting in explosive depressurization. The pressure difference tore through the living chambers, pulling Hellevik off his feet and causing chaos on the deck. The air pressure inside the bell instantly dropped from 9 atmospheres, the pressure at 297 feet below the water, to 1 atmosphere, the surface air pressure. The explosive release of air sent the heavy diving bell flying, striking Crammond and Saunders and critically injuring them. It remains unclear whether Crammond disconnected the diving bell without an order, or if the diving leader instructed the coupling lock to be removed while the tunnel was still pressurized. Crammond ultimately succumbed to his injuries. Although Saunders survived, he was severely injured. When crew members found him, he was partially trapped under the 4-ton diving bell, with collapsed lungs, 3 fractures in his back, and a broken neck. The 4 divers inside faced an even worse fate. With that sort of high speed, it is only reasonable to believe that this unplanned decompression gave the other 4 divers an instant and painless death. This type of death is practically unsurvivable, and with how it affected their bodies, their remains were never retrieved. The divers never realized what happened, nor felt the effects of their tragic deaths. And despite their proximity to the door, Coward, Lucas, and Bergersen's blood boiled instantly as dissolved nitrogen rapidly reverted to gas. There was no escaping this gruesome fate, and they died instantly. The nitrogen expansion caused fat to accumulate and solidify in their arteries, veins, hearts, and livers. The force of the gas expansion scattered their blood and bodies throughout the chamber. While Lucas, Bergerson, and Coward were left unrecognizable, Hellevick suffered the worst death since he was closest to the connecting door. The pressure equalization partially jammed the door to Chamber 1, forcing Hellevick's body through a small 24-inch crescent-shaped opening with tremendous force. Unable to fit through, the pressure caused his internal organs to burst out through the opening. Investigators later found parts of Hellevick's spine, windpipe, and small intestine inside the bell, while other organs appeared intact, as if they had been expertly dissected and ejected. The incident resulted in 5 fatalities, with the severity of the accident leaving little blood, despite the mangled state of the bodies. Initially, people blamed the crew, potential miscommunication, or poor procedures for the accident. The crew had worked over 12-hour shifts frequently, so a mistake could have easily occurred. However, no one could determine the exact reasons behind the decision to unlatch the system incorrectly. With Cramen deceased, the true reason for opening the clamp remains unknown. To minimize risks, flawless execution of every operation detail, particularly pressure-driven transfers, is essential to avoid such catastrophic outcomes. The North Sea Divers Alliance, consisting of active divers and victims' relatives, believed negligent higher-ups provided faulty equipment. They argued that the pressure chamber system was obsolete and lacked fail-safes to prevent the disaster. The equipment used was from 1975 and did not include modern safety features, such as an interlocking mechanism to prevent opening the trunk while the bell was still pressurized. Consequently, Norwegian regulations were revised to require interlock mechanisms for all bell systems. Nonetheless, many believed the primary cause of the accident was the missing locking mechanism. Decades later, the narrative seriously changed. It took until 2009 for the Norwegian government, which oversaw the Byford dolphin in 1983, to acknowledge their responsibility for the deadly incident and compensate the families of the deceased divers. The government provided undisclosed settlements to the families of all 6 victims, including Saunders. The report concluded that faulty equipment, rather than human error, caused the accident. Contributing factors included the loud environment, which interfered with communications, ensuring that orders were unclear and misinterpreted. But the fact remains that we might never know exactly what caused the accident at the rig. Everyone who could tell us something was now no longer alive. The Byford dolphin rig, a notorious figure in the annals of offshore drilling, was a significant presence for more than 40 years, operating in various locations worldwide. Despite its infamous history, the rig continued to function until 2016. That year marked the end of its long and disastrous career in the oil and gas industry. The decommissioning of the Byford dolphin symbolized not only the conclusion of an era fraught with tragedy, but also the ongoing evolution of safety standards in offshore drilling. The legacy of the rig serves as a stark reminder of the human cost associated with industrial negligence. Cave diving has claimed a significant number of lives, especially when individuals venture into the dangerous depths of underwater caves. Cave exploration is challenging on its own, but cave diving takes those risks to another level. The situation becomes even more perilous under extreme conditions, like those faced by a group of 5 men who ventured into an underwater ice cave, spanning over 400 meters. Unfortunately, only 3 of them emerged from the cave alive, while the other 2 did not survive. A GoPro camera mounted on one of the divers captured their harrowing dive, providing an in-depth understanding of the terrifying events that unfolded in the depths. The footage revealed the worst possible scenario, as the divers faced unbearable discomfort and stress. Tragically, 2 divers lost their lives. This is the chilling account of the Plura cave disaster. 5 men of Finnish nationality, namely Kai Kankkonen, Patrik Grönqvist, Jari Huotarinen, Vesa Rantanen, and Jari Yu, set out to explore the dreaded Pluragrotta cave. They had planned a rather dangerous exploration of this terrifying cave, which leads up to the Steinugelflaget dry cave. Kai and Patrick had previously discovered the connection between the Plura cave and the Stein dry cave. These 2 explorers, alongside another diver named Sami Pakarinen, had successfully completed a dive from the dry cave's entrance to the plura cave opening, which they called a traverse. Given their previous accomplishment, they were confident they could pull it off again, but this time they planned to start from the other end. The cave's depths reach a staggering 426 feet, or approximately 130 meters, making it one of the longest water-filled caves in northern Europe. This cave presents numerous challenges, such as low visibility and confusing cave patterns. On February 6, 2014, in Rana, Norway, these men began their ill-fated dive. The 5 men were traveling in Jari Huotarinen's van, which was towing a truck stacked full of equipment. These men were set to explore the depths of this terrifying cave. The contents of the truck included a snowmobile, underwater scooters, tons of diving cylinders, and some other smaller tools. The divers were evidently skilled and had knowledge of what they were venturing into, as 2 of them had already made the traverse. It was a 15-hour drive as they made their way across Finland, Sweden, and Norway, analyzing and reviewing their plans bit by bit prior to reaching their destination. The dive was speculated to take only 5 hours if everything went according to plan. They decided to split into 2 teams once inside the cave to prevent and reduce sediments and ensure water clarity. They arrived at Rana and then rested at the Jorbru farm for the night, as they were exhausted from the long drive. Diving to depths exceeding over 130 feet is considered technical diving, and divers who wish to undergo this kind of expedition must have undergone special training, as specific qualifications are required. According to confirmed reports, each of these men were certified deep water divers and certified CCR, closed circuit rebreather, full cave divers, according to international standards. The qualifications these men possessed gave them the right to undertake such a dangerous dive. However, despite their qualifications, experience, and training, this challenging dive was soon to become the most terrifying nightmare they would experience. They got up in the morning, prepping for the dive. The temperature was below freezing at -3 degrees Celsius. To get to the cave entrance, the men needed to dive through the frozen Plura lake, and they began sawing an entrance to grant them access to the cave. Kai, Vesa, and Jari Yu left for the entrance of Steinugel, the dry cave, to drop off some equipment. Meanwhile, Patrick used a chainsaw to open a triangular space on the frozen lake. Preparations were going very well despite the low temperature and the late start, and all things were going according to plan. In a short time, Patrick had already sawed through the ice, but by then, the other 3 hadn't returned from the Steinugel cave. Patrick then asked Huotarinen if they should wait for the others before diving in, but he signaled to Patrick that it was time to dive, and Patrick agreed. They made their way to the cave with their scooters and started to descend into the cave entrance. They used a CCR, a modern type of breathing system that doesn't discharge the already breathed air, but recycles it to allow diving times of over 17 hours. Another major piece of equipment that greatly aided the divers was the underwater scooters, which propelled them further into the water, helping to save and conserve their energy. As the pair continued to descend into the cave, reaching extreme depths, the risks exponentially increased as the temperature dropped drastically and the water pressure rose. These divers observed absolute caution, as the duo carried a 3rd rebreather system as a reserve in case of a system failure. A tear in the diving suit at such depths would be fatal due to the frigid temperatures and high pressures, increasing the risk of hypercapnia, or excessive carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. Hypercapnia can result from panicked breathing, or when a diver breathes too quickly. The CCR rebreather, while highly efficient, can also be a double-edged sword and cause casualties if the system malfunctions and distributes carbon dioxide into the diver's bloodstream. Excess carbon dioxide could lead to confusion, fatigue, and ultimately, loss of consciousness. With the daylight fading little by little, the descent of Patrick and Huotarinen saw them descend to depths of 34 meters, covering a distance of over 500 feet. After a while, they reached another chamber that was over 250 meters long. This particular chamber is a part of an underwater cave known as an air chamber, as this region is partially filled with water and allows for air spaces that enable easy breathing, especially for novice divers. The cave was spacious enough to allow both divers to move freely up until this point. After they passed the air chamber, the duo continued their descent with their scooters still leading the way, reaching depths of 60, 100, and then 130 meters, which was the deepest part of the cave. At this point, they powered down their scooters so Huotarinen could take in the beauty of the cave depth. It was a sight to behold. They had both agreed on how they would switch to their third rebreather system, reducing any kind of risk they might face. As they kept moving, they prepared for the final ascent up to the dry cave entrance, and their adrenaline levels began spiking. While preparing for the final ascent, Patrick was leading the way and made a 90-degree move into that final section. However, he could no longer see his partner's flashlight. He didn't panic though, as the terrain was very narrow in this region and they could not move simultaneously, so he waited. Suddenly, he saw Huotarinen's flashlight moving erratically, as if Huotarinen was in a state of shock or intense panic, with the light waving up and down, signaling distress. Patrick's heart began racing as he tried to locate his friend in the darkness of that depth. Finally, he was able to make his way back to Huotarinen, who demanded that Patrick remove his bailout cylinder as it seemed to be blocking his path. Patrick did that in haste, but still, Huotarinen remained trapped and couldn't move. Then, Patrick noticed that the cord of Huotarinen's scooter was stuck between two rocks. Though it seemed like an easy task to free the cord, even after being freed from the rocks, Huotarinen was still panicking and screaming, asking Patrick to give him the bailout gas. At this point, there was nothing in Huotarinen's mouth. Now panicking, Patrick placed a regulator in Huotarinen's mouth and pressed the purge, but Huotarinen inhaled cave water instead, sealing his fate due to the excess amount of carbon dioxide at such depths. Sadly, Patrick could confirm that his friend was dead. Now he needed to focus on getting up the cave to warn the others about the blocked passage ahead and behind them. When he checked his dive computer to see how long it would take him to get out of the water, it showed approximately 7 hours. Patrick was shocked by this, as previously, he had just 2 hours remaining in the water. The amount of time he spent at such depths and in the freezing temperature had drastically increased his decompression time. With little oxygen left and a very slim chance of survival, Patrick made the ultimate decision to leave Huotarinen behind. It took them little to no time to make their descent into the depths of the cave, passing through the same way that Patrick and Huotarinen had come. They knew nothing of Huotarinen's dead body lying just ahead of them. As they reached the 90-degree ascent point leading to the last chamber, even though they had all the necessary supplies, one of them still wanted to bring an additional cylinder, just to be safe. Visa wanted to bring the extra cylinders, so Kai helped him hold on to one of them. It was a little past 2 p.m., and they were already at great depths, where decompression was becoming a crucial factor to consider. Visa was leading the way, but when they reached a certain depth, his fins got stuck between some rocks, resulting in a 5-minute delay. This mere 5-minute delay at such depths would translate to almost an hour of decompression time when ascending from the cave. As Vesa was about to start the ascent, the constant beeping sound of a failed apparatus shook him to his core. He couldn't bear to look at Huotarinen's lifeless body and informed the others quietly about the tragic discovery. Trying to stay calm under such circumstances, since panicking at these depths would only lead to death, he did his best to push through the narrow space that was now partially blocked by Huotarinen's body. On the other hand, Jari Yu was not handling the situation well. His emotions got the better of him, and within moments, he was dead. Kai then decided to make a U-turn back through the entrance they had come from, while Vesa made his way through another passage. Hardening their hearts in the process, both men had to maintain cool heads to prevent the same fate that had befallen their two friends from happening to them. Ultimately, the time spent at the depth of the cave would cost more decompression stops for Kai as he made his way back through the route they had taken. He wasn't sure if his oxygen would last through the computer's decompression stops, so he decided to risk decompression sickness rather than dying in the cave by drowning. He eventually made his way to the air chamber, where he was able to breathe the oxygen there, which was sustainable enough for him to stay alive for days, at least. However, he couldn't count on that, and proceeded with his final ascent of 36 feet up. One thing he didn't know was that, on the other side, Patrick was also making his way up the dry cave and was almost at the end of this terrifying journey. As Patrick moved, edging closer to the entrance above, he spotted light beneath him, which turned out to be Vesa. Having come so close, he made his way to the entrance and pulled himself out, patiently waiting for Vesa to reach the entrance as well. Patrick's dive took about 9 hours, 4 hours longer than the proposed 5 hours they should have spent in the water, and he reached the cave entrance at about 9 p.m. that same day. While waiting at the dry cave and rummaging the backpack of his friends, he then saw the light from Vesa's torch draw closer and closer as he made his way out, and the two amigos were reunited. On the other hand, Kai made his way out of the cave 3 hours later and moved to the frozen lake entrance when he couldn't spot the entrance. He figured out that the open section has frozen over, but it wasn't thick though, as he could locate it and break through it. Coming out of the cave, he realized he was the only one there and thought the worst had happened to his compatriots. He went to the van, started the engine, and left the headlights on as he collapsed on the ground to rest, while Vesa and Patrick moved over to the farm and changed into normal clothes. They immediately informed Norwegian authorities about the death of their friends, unknown to them that Kai survived. It didn't take long for them to spot the van in a distance with headlight on, and they made their way to the van only for them to find Kai on the floor shivering, and they could confirm that they were the only ones that made it out of the caves alive. They were immediately hospitalized. They spent an awkwardly long period of time in the hospital, but even with that, Vesa suffered from a spinal injury as a result of the decompression sickness, while Kai had serious anxiety and just wanted to return home to his family. In the midst of this, the police investigated the occurrence and questioned the men before concluding that it was an accident that caused the deaths of both men. The state then devised measures to retrieve the bodies of Jari and Hotarinen by hiring 3 experienced English divers for this rescue. However, when they arrived, they were unable to retrieve the bodies as it was too dangerous. When Patrick heard that the bodies could not be retrieved by the state, he contacted a few of the divers he knew, and they attempted a secret rescue mission without the knowledge of the local authorities, as those authorities could shut them down before they even started. Patrick led the group alongside some very experienced divers. Vesa wasn't cleared to dive, as he was still recovering from his decompression sickness, but he assisted from above. Eventually, they were able to recover the bodies of both men and honor them with a proper burial with their families. This event was dreaded and painful, but it didn't stop the surviving trio from taking on another diving expedition in Spain. This tragic tale reminds us of the risks involved in extreme cave diving, even for the most skilled divers. Please make sure to respect the boundaries of nature and always prioritize safety when exploring. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more detailed accounts of incredible and dangerous adventures. Stay safe, and see you next time. This mysterious cave, surrounded by several rumors and speculations, intrigued these two men to explore, despite the fact they had no plan to maneuver the terrain and equally had no equipment to explore this uncharted cave. Hence, turning a regular day of camping into a nightmare when one of them attempted to go through an unknown passage. Stay tuned as we take you through the exploration of young Robert Kennedy as he struggled through the terrain of an unexplored cave, and ultimately, it cost him his life. With little to no preparation and zero caution for the danger of exploring an uncharted cave, Kennedy and his stepbrother Richard set out into a limestone cave in Oklahoma, famously known as the Hermit Cave. The mysteries and suspense-filled stories surrounding this wonder leave people in awe of what might just lie beneath the ground. But eventually, Kennedy was the curious cat that gambled everything and made his way into the cave. It was the 5th of April, 1999, when our 21-year-old curious Kennedy, all the way from Oklahoma, set out for a camping expedition near the limestone enclave of the Hermit Cave. It was situated at the eastern edge of Fort Gibson Lake, which was unsurprisingly located in the center of eastern Oklahoma. He didn't embark on this camping expedition on his own, though. He had the company of his stepbrother, Richard Steeler Jr., alongside the pair's mutual friend, Ben Keegley, who hailed all the way from Tulsa. The three guys had a night that was far from boring as they entertained one another by discussing the folklore and the mystery surrounding the nearby caves in the region, specifically the Hermit Cave, which had uncharted terrains and mysterious pathways. So many stories surrounded it, as some even believed that way underneath the caves would lie some treasures of sorts, or, most likely, gypsum formations. All this ensued as the trio sat beside a campfire and rested underneath the cosmic view of the tiny stars displayed in the sky of Oklahoma. The Hermit Cave was quite familiar among the locals in the area, but was completely clothed in mystery. Kennedy had knowledge of the main entrance of the cave, which many explorers considered boring. Meanwhile, Robert's curiosity revolved around the speculations of hidden passages around the cave that might lead to some hidden wonders. As the trio enjoyed the warmth of each other's company and the beauty of the night sky, it grew very late, and the cold of the night set in, forcing each of them to fall asleep. Upon waking the next morning, they all decided to have a little breakfast before setting out to their respective homes, but Robert had something else in mind. The previous night's discussion had ignited a sense of adventure in him, and now he wanted to take a diversion on the way home to explore one of the limestone caves in the region, specifically the Hermit Cave. His stepbrother Richard agreed to go with him. Ben would have followed them, but he had an early shift at his workplace, so it was just Robert and Richard. Now, proceeding with this expedition would mean breaking a cave exploration rule that clearly states no fewer than 3 people should undertake any cave exploration of any kind, as 3 individuals allow for a safety measure. If one explorer gets stuck, the second one would stay with him, and the third would head out to get help. But in this case, with just 2 participants, they went ahead anyway. As the mouth of the cave was not narrow, they both ventured into the cave with no equipment or safety gadgets of any kind. The only thing they had was a flashlight. The only thing that stopped Ben from going with them was his commitment to work, as he had that early shift. He was the first to give in to the idea of exploration, even as they knew they were violating the cardinal rule of having 2 companions before exploring a cave. They both went anyway. Ben's presence ultimately might have prevented the tragedy that befell 21-year-old Kennedy. After exploring the beautiful rock formation, which was the major attraction of the cave that caught the attention of both Robert and his stepbrother, while they were coming out of the cave, Robert spotted one of the sideways caves that had always been rumored about. He felt an abrupt flow of joy, as a chance to explore that which hadn't been mapped felt like an expedition worth any sort of risk. Had he known, he would have edged out and left the cave while he could. He started his venture into the unknown with a plan in place. He agreed with his brother Richard that he would be the only one to enter the narrow crevice while Richard waited outside the cave for him to come out. At that point, it seemed like a good idea until the unexpected happened. He promised his stepbrother that he would do well to come out as soon as possible and avoid venturing too deep into a cave. He had no idea how it was shaped. As he started moving through the cave, the path saw him move downward into another narrow region, which was measured at about 150 feet, having so many turns and twists that were very tough to navigate. With a path looking like it was created by a millipede, it took maximum skill and strategy to maneuver through this space, starting with sticking your head out in front of you, followed by the shoulders, and then finally your legs. Eventually, Robert got to the first dangerous region in this cave, reported to be a keyhole formation. Many believed that the first mistake Robert made was passing through the keyhole formation, as he didn't consider how he was going to go through that same point, but this time with his legs first, as there was no guarantee he would have enough space to be able to turn and face the other side. It wasn't long before he figured out that the space in front of him was too narrow and had a slimmer shape than he anticipated. So, he began to rethink his journey forward and decided to go back with his legs leading the way. Upon reaching the crucial keyhole zone, he couldn't pass through, as the upper part of his body on the other end prevented it. Seeing that move was a failure, he proceeded to move forward and squeeze through that narrow passage in front. That was the worst decision he had made since embarking on this expedition. He got stuck in that hourglass-shaped region. At that point, all his pushing and pulling were effortless, as gravity also seemed to be working against him. Not long after, Robert began to call out for help to his stepbrother outside. But of course, he was too far inside the cave to be heard by anyone around. It was unrecorded, and cannot be stated how long it took his brother to realize that this wait had been long overdue, as he decided to venture into that opening, following a faint light emitted from Robert's flashlight. Kneeling and screaming his brother's name as he made his way through, screaming back in hope, Robert called out to his brother, responding to the calls he heard, and letting him know that he was trapped and finding it really hard to breathe. In a vast determination to make sure he rescued his brother, Richard hurried blindly into the cave. But soon enough, he realized he couldn't do much without light and assistance. So he let his brother know and made his way out of the cave to converge with assistance and equipment to make the rescue easier. So then, in about an hour, Richard conveyed a large team of rescuers, 10 in number, all experts. They all began to put their heads together in order to devise a means to rescue the trapped Kennedy. Several factors complicated the rescue efforts made by the team to get him out. The main factor was the distance between Robert and the main entrance, which was about 46 meters, causing a really slow process and a lengthy distance to cover to get to him. Additionally, the narrow path was a significant challenge, as they could only proceed one step at a time. The rescuers also had issues with breathing due to the number of people entering the cave, prompting them to use a ventilation system to circulate warm air throughout the passages. They sought out different means to rescue him, but all proved to be either futile or an avenue for a collapse as they attempted to use manual methods to break through the passage. Nonetheless, the clock was ticking, and time was of the essence for dear Robert Kennedy. As exhaustion began to set in, the rescuers started rotating shifts to conserve energy, all in attempts to break the keychain and ultimately rescue Kennedy. With each rescuer taking note of Kennedy's status, they could all see that gradually, his health had begun to deteriorate as signs of suffocation started to appear. With each passing moment, the line between life and death for Robert Kennedy grew thinner. Eventually, the rescuers were able to break through the keyhole structure and made their way to Robert's feet. There was unresponsiveness at first, but then there was a faint pulse as he moved his legs a bit, which instilled hope in the rescuers. Attempts were made to pull him out, but it all turned out futile, as the hourglass structure held him tightly, and the sloppy terrain of that particular region made it impossible to pull him out. They went on to try a pulley system, but it would not hold due to the tenderness of the limestone structure. It was too soft, and all inputs were literally falling off. The next step was to dig around Robert, aiming to break the hourglass trap he was in. The narrowness of the trap made it virtually impossible to even pass a bottle of water to Kennedy, as he was clearly suffocating and gradually losing his life. It seemed to everyone that a Saturn ring of rocks had covered him entirely, making their job more tedious. It took about an hour before the rescuers were able to initiate movement on Kennedy's body. After a 5-hour rescue mission, they managed to dig around his body and proceeded to extract him from within the cave, bringing him to the entrance. Already waiting outside were the paramedics, who were on standby to assess his body and vitals and then transport him to the hospital. Unfortunately, this time around, they found no pulse, as he was already dead. It was believed by the paramedics that Robert died due to suffocation from chest compression and the low regulation of oxygen in that narrow path. The night started as a really interesting one, just chilling with friends, but it turned into an adventurous expedition. Well, it began as an adventurous journey, but ended in tragic tragedy, reminding us of the dangers of the unknown in this world. This story is a heartbreaking reminder of the risks of uncharted exploration. If you're ever tempted to explore places like this, remember the importance of preparation, safety, and following the rules. It's not just about adventure, it's about coming back safely. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more gripping tales, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Let us know in the comments what other stories you'd like us to cover next. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there. Ready for a spine-chilling journey through 3 of the most terrifying caving experiences. First, face the nightmare of being trapped underwater in a dark cave. Next, feel the fear of getting tangled in a web of ropes. Finally, witness the horror of a deadly fall from great heights. Hold on tight. This is not for the faint of heart. Story 1. Disaster within the cave in the Otter Springs. In May 1990, a group of 5 divers gathered at Gainesville, Florida. The purpose of this gathering was to do something known as potholing. This involves going from spring to spring, diving to check out underwater sceneries. This area was just perfect, as it was home to the Otter Springs, which is about 40 feet deep. At first glance, the Otter Springs looks like any other pond, but its uniquely clear and warm waters, filled with a lot of fish, set it apart. It also features a bank with a few trees and a grassy beach. The group suited up, then began their exploration, descending to the bottom of the springs and checking out a large crack running along the floor. Most of these cracks lead to a larger underwater cave system. As they ventured into the Otter Springs, they made their way to the crack on the ocean floor and noticed it spanned out into a large semicircle tunnel. But this was the limit for all of them, as they were not yet cave certified. Members of the group include Jackie, Ron, Alan, Chris, and Ken. Jackie and Ron have the most experience, with over 50 dives, while the rest have a little under 7 dives each. All the group members came to a unanimous decision that the best course of action was to turn back, as the oxygen tanks were already running low. But Ken, one of the least experienced in the group, was filled with intrigue about the unknown cave system. However, Ken's curiosity got the better of him as he made his way into the tunnel, prompting the others to go after him. As they also entered, they got intrigued and explored different passages, all caught in awe by the cool things they saw. Then, they began their swim back. Jackie was the first to get up, and was disappointed when she noticed no one else came up after her. She knew they had kept on exploring, and could only hope they were safe. So, she got out of the water, waiting anxiously at the bank for her friends. While Jackie was worried, the others were busy having the time of their lives as they continued going deeper and deeper into the tunnel. Ron stopped for a second to look at his gas gauge. As he then looked up, all the silt they had stirred up while coming through blinded him. He couldn't see the walls anymore, and began swimming uncontrollably, hitting the cave walls. Like a scene in a movie, he saw light. Somehow, he had made his way to the tunnel's exit, so he quickly swam back to the surface. With 3 others still inside the cave, Jackie contemplated whether she should go back in to fetch them, but the air in her tank wouldn't be enough. A man nearby walked up to her. He had been monitoring them for a while, and recalled seeing them go in earlier. He then asked if they were cave certified. When they said no, he took off into the distance. By pure chance, diving legend Woody Jasper was at the camp that day. Thankfully, he had all his equipment in the trunk of his car. He suited up and rushed into the water, but his face showed pure anger. He knew the chances of saving them were very, very slim. When Woody got to the crack, he noticed signs that no one had been there for a while, but somewhere in the back of his mind, he was quite certain that this would be a body recovery. As he continued, he only went into the cloudy tunnels, as those were the ones they had possibly gone through. Confirming his earlier suspicions, he found a mask on the floor. As he looked directly up from the mask, he saw 4 legs huddled together. He immediately grabbed one of them and headed straight to the surface. The person Woody saved looked pale, so they immediately began CPR on him while Woody dashed back in to save the remaining 2. The rescue team giving Alan CPR noticed his eyes began to move, and he regained consciousness. Because of how pale he looked, there is no telling how much the water affected his brain, but thankfully, he is alive. As Woody arrived back in the tunnel, he was shocked to see that the other diver was now conscious. Quickly, he began a process called buddy breathing as they started their swim back to the surface. Chris was then able to make his way to the bank on his own. Now, Woody went back in to find Ken, who had been in the water the longest. As Woody surfaced with him, all efforts were tried, but he wasn't as lucky as the rest. He had already drowned. Sadly, 4 were saved, but 1 was lost. Their story serves as a lesson to learn from. Story 2. The Ellison Cave Tragedy. On February 12, 2011, 5 boys and 5 girls, all students of the University of Florida, ventured into Ellison's cave. The leader was Grant Lockenbach, with other members including Michael and some others who had done caving before in the past. Grant and Michael were both in different years, but they were close friends, both belonging to the same group, the Academic Scholars and Christian Brothers. Only a few weeks before they went on this particular adventure, the 2 guys had visited another cave. Let's talk about Ellison's Cave. It's about 1,000 feet deep and is nestled in Walker County on Pigeon Mountain in Georgia. This cave is said to be the 12th deepest cave in the whole of America. But that's not the only crazy thing about it. It's also said to have the deepest unobstructed pit in the entire United States. The depth of this pit gave rise to the nickname, the Fantastic Pit. The group traveled 400 miles from the university, staying in a hotel close to the area where Pigeon Mountain is located. The next morning, they got up filled with excitement as they prepared for their climb up the mountain. They put their caving materials into their vehicle, and then drove up to Pigeon Mountain from the hotel. They arrived at Pigeon Mountain, taking only the essentials, and left their phones in the vehicle. The group began climbing the mountain, but they started having second thoughts as the cold intensified with each step. This was a big issue because they were all dressed casually, without thick clothes. However, Grant and Michael reassured them, reminding everyone that they had no intentions of going deep into the cave. Upon reaching the entrance, their mouths were left agape by what they found. They saw a narrow opening, so small that only one person could pass through at a time. But this was all they could see, as the cave was very, very dark. When they turned on their flashlights, the beauty of the cave was revealed. The cave being very cold, they decided that exploring only a small portion of it was the best course of action. As they were about to complete their adventure, someone's backpack fell into a pit called the Warm Pit. It was about 125 feet deep. This pit had a waterfall, so the temperature there was extremely cold. Since the backpack contained essentials, it was very important for them to retrieve it. Grant, the leader, decided to go, but the rest of the group debated against it, as they had a sudden eerie feeling. However, Grant insisted and went in. He made his way down, lowering himself on a rope. As he descended, the waterfall began causing issues for him, making him very cold. As he tried to avoid this, the worst happened. He got entangled and screamed desperately for help. Michael, scared for his friend, strapped himself to the same rope in an attempt to go rescue him. As soon as Michael tried to turn Grant around in an attempt to rescue him, he too got trapped in the rope. He began screaming for help, prompting the other friends to make their way out to call 911 for help. The rescue team arrived, treating the friends who had called, and quickly making their way into the cave to where Michael and Grant were hanging. They checked both boys for a pulse, but there was none. Both were already dead. The other students were left grieving over Michael and Grant's deaths. It took the rescuers about 6 hours to release the corpses of the boys. This loss wasn't just felt by the friends, it was felt by the whole university, as both Grant and Michael were academic scholars. This led to the creation of the Grant Lockenbach Memorial Fund, with the goal of providing scholarships. Michael's tale of heroism spread far and wide, with the Carnegie Hero Fund Commission giving him a memorial medal. A scholarship fund was also created to honor him. Story 3. The Fern Cave Incident. November 2nd, 1997. Alexia Hansen, her husband, and a friend, who were all experienced cavers, had planned to enter the Fern Cave via the pit entrance. The Fern Cave is located in Alabama and was discovered in 1961. Mapping it proved to be a truly difficult task. Fern Cave is said to have 5 different entrances. One of these entrances is called the Surprise Pit. From its name alone, one can tell it's not your regular entrance. It is said to have one of the deepest vertical drops in North America. The next morning, the group geared up and set out for the cave, driving for about 3 hours. The ride was bumpy though, because most of the road they drove on was unpaved. After that, they hiked up a hill. Finally, they reached the mouth of the cave and descended into it. Picture this. Imagine a hole consumed by darkness, around 437 feet deep, with a tunnel or passageway so tight that only an average-sized person could fit through at a time. Thankfully, there would be a wide chamber of about 200 feet. To get to this, you have to descend carefully from the top of the cave to the bottom. A rope exists there to guide explorers through the cave system. Alexia's husband descended first, then her friend. She was the last to descend. She descended quickly through the pit, with her headlight illuminating the areas she passed through. Her husband and her friend noticed she was going too fast, or one could say out of control. She then fell 67 feet straight into a rock pile at the end. The sad part was that her husband had to witness the painful descent of his wife and caving partner. Luckily for them, she had only sustained injuries, so they quickly and carefully made their descent towards her. Upon reaching her, they discovered she was in pure agony, and that she had possibly sustained internal bleeding caused by the scrambling of her internal organs. Multiple bones were fractured. Her husband, frightened, rushed to the cave entrance, ascending through the pit back to the mouth of the cave to call the rescue team for help. The rescue team arrived, traveling down the long pit, and made it to Alexia. The rescue itself was not an easy operation due to the fact that multiple bones were broken, and she already had a lot of internal bleeding. The rescuer's perseverance and her good spirits assisted greatly in her rescue. Hours were spent on the rescue, and they finally made it to the mouth of the tunnel. However, the rescuers noticed something. It had been a while since they had heard cries of pain from Alexia. When they checked her pulse, they found she was no longer breathing. They immediately began performing CPR, but it was to no avail. The coroner's report stated she died about 50 feet from the entrance of the cave. Her husband was left in sorrow. His lifelong partner had left him. As he laid her to her final resting place, he made a vow never to go caving again. These tragic stories remind us of the dangers that lie beneath the surface of exploration. While the thrill of discovery can be tempting, safety should always come first. Whether it's diving deep or scaling great heights, remember the risks involved. If you enjoyed these cautionary tales or learned something valuable, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. For more stories like this, make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.